Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, staff. Good afternoon, guests. Let's call this meeting to order. Today, we welcome The Universe featuring Ray to sing our national anthem. The Universe featuring Ray is a dynamic female performing entertaining acoustic rock. You can't miss her if she happens to be in your general area because her presence is undeniable. She's commonly referred to as a ray of sunshine. And Ray's motto is to create your universe. She leads through example by taking pride in creating her own stage props, clothing, clay, jewelry, merchandise, logos, videos, and other art. This principle is infused into the creative styles of her music, combined with witty lyrics and catchy riffs. At just 18, Ray released her first full-length record as an electronic dance duo. And in December of 2016, a band from North Carolina found her online and asked her to write, record, and perform with them. The Peace Leeches plan to debut their music in the fall of 2017. And you can stay tuned with the new releases and upcoming gigs by connecting with The Universe featuring Ray through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. Over to you, colleagues. Please rise for the singing of the national anthem.
Thank you. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true, no, strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God, keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thank you so much. My name is The Universe featuring Ray, and I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, Universe featuring Ray, for being here. And colleagues, why did we take so long to decide to sing the national anthem here in Council Chambers? Absolutely incredible. I can't quite remember whose idea that was. Councillor Zafman, did you bring that one forward? Pretty impressive. Okay, I'm just going to move around to the podium for some very important recognitions. Colleagues, in 2014, the City of London launched the Employee Awards of Excellence Initiative. And under the employment recognition, there are a number of awards. One is the City Manager's Award for Collaboration. It's awarded to a person or team that has shown significant collaboration within the City of London, across its service areas, or with its partners and organizations in the broader community. And the City Manager's Award for Collaboration for 2016 goes to Mark Ridley. We all know Mark. Mark was nominated for his work with the London Middlesex Road Safety Committee and implementing the recommendations of the London Road Safety Strategy approved by Council. Mark has worked closely with other departments within the corporation and the London Middlesex Road Safety Committee on 22 pedestrian crossovers near schools as part of the multi-year program. These pedestrian crossovers make roads safer for school children, pedestrians, and school crossing guards, which ultimately improve the health and safety of our community. Mark, thank you so much for making our London a safer place to live, work, and play. Okay. Now, the Live Healthy, Work Healthy Award is awarded to a person or a team that is committed to a healthy workplace and that exhibits and is committed to a healthy balance between work, life, and wellness. And the Live Healthy, Work Healthy Award for 2016 goes to the Mental Health Strategy Team. Come on out. These, lots and lots of familiar faces here. And these employees were nominated for the Live Healthy, Work Healthy Award because they were willing to step forward and assist with our first mental health strategy, Stop the Silence, launched in 2016. Stats indicate that 1 in 5 people will be impacted by mental illness through their lifetime. And the City of London is committed to supporting positive mental health. This workplace mental health strategy will work to increase employees' awareness, understanding, and empathy of mental health through proactive promotion and education. These individuals help to build a strategy that will create an environment where we can all live healthy and we can all work healthy. And the clerk is going to help me with the awards. We have Lisa Broman here. Congratulations, Lisa. Lance Adili. Thank you. Jennifer MacArthur. How are you? Congratulations and thank you. Joanne McLean. Hey, Joanne, how are you? Thank you so much. Yeah. And we have John Danaskos. You know what, John? I see you every day, and I'm just learning your last name after 6 years. Nice to meet you, John. We have Joe Windsor.
Yep.
Joe, thank you very much. Bradley Enright. Bradley, over there. Congrats. We have Evan Jones. Hey, how you doing? Thank you very much.
Cheers. Yeah.
Good. And we have Jack Manganaro. Thank you. Not in attendance with us here today, Scott Stafford and Catherine Peters. We have another award. This is the Living Our Mission Award. It's awarded to a person or a team that represents the City of London's mission to be at your service, a respected and inspired public service partner building a better city for all. And the Living Our Mission Award goes to Mary Jane Kreider. Mary Jane Kreider. And Mary Jane was nominated for a commitment to public service. Mary Jane has worked as a front-facing customer service employee with social services for over 20 years. She's passionate about the service she provides, and she has a friendly and open personality that Ontario Works clients have come to trust. Her support each day extends to so many people, her co-workers, community members, and also some of London's most vulnerable people. And so it's my honor, Mary Jane, to present you with this award. Obviously, I can see it in your face. Thank you. Thank you. Just a question of all appreciation. Take care. And the Volunteer Award for 2016 goes to Jim Purser. Jim. Jim was nominated for working as a scout leader. Whoops. There we go. That's better. As a scout leader for over 30 years and providing outstanding leadership and guidance to our local youth, helping to ensure that they are volunteers, that the volunteers and that they volunteer in our community and that they become productive leaders in our future. Jim dedicates a great deal of his own personal time to leading scout meetings and various camping trips. It speaks to Jim's character that he's been a respected scout leader for almost 3 decades. I hate to tell you this, Jim, but you could have been my scout leader based on that information. He deserves to be applauded for his long-standing dedication to our community's youth. Jim retired from the City of London at the end of 2016, and he continues to be an example of leadership and selflessness that will leave an everlasting impression on the City of London and all of the employees here. Congratulations, Jim, and thank you. And I also want to say congratulations to the more than 82 other employees that were nominated by their peers for the 2016 Awards of Excellence. So let's give everyone a final round of applause, and we're going to pose for a picture as well. We need 2 rows, or are we good?
Oh, let me see. Great, everybody. Thank you.
We have one additional recognition, colleagues, that will take place at 6:20 this evening. Okay, so we'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. There are no disclosures, so let's, Deputy Mayor Hubert, go ahead.
Mayor, I'll be disclosing interest on C4 for the reasons that are outlined in the report of the corporate services agenda.
Thank you very much. Any other colleagues? Okay, seeing none, let's move on with the agenda. Review of confidential matters to be considered in public. There are none, so we're going to move into closed session. I think, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, before we move into closed session, I'm wondering if my colleagues, and this was circulated in the added agenda, would permit me to make an inquiry, which would be subject to closed session. To do that, I need a change of order, and then the inquiry, and then a reason to add it to go into camera. So I'd like to proceed with that at this time.
Okay, let's move forward with that. That'll come up on screen. Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Let's call the question. Okay. Councillor Squire is voting manually, yay.
And Councillor Usher has also indicated yes.
Councillor Usher voting manually, yay. Yeah, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
So the inquiry I would like to make an inquiry related to a matter pertaining to personnel matters, including information regarding identifiable individuals with respect to employment-related matters, advice, recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose, and for the purpose of providing instructions and directions to officers and employees of the corporation. Given that, I have to ask for adding a matter to go into closed session.
Okay, up on screen now, moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Helmer. I've seen, speaker, yep, go ahead, Councillor Squire.
No, I'm still manual.
Manually, yay. Councillor Usher, yay. We're voting on screen.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1.
Okay. Excellent. I think you're good. Okay, colleagues, let's now look to the screen to vote on the reasons outlined in the agenda, as well as the additional reason that was just brought forward by Councillor Morgan. Be up on screen in a moment. Councillor Helmer. That's been moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any other, go ahead.
I'd like to read the extra reason.
And we're going to read the extra reason just for those watching from home, and so it's in the public record.
A matter pertaining to personal matters, including information regarding identifiable individuals with respect to employment-related matters, advice or recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose, and for the purpose of providing instructions and directions to officers and employees of the corporation.
Okay, colleagues, that has been moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Ridley. Any discussion? Let's call the question. Voting manually, Councillor Squire, yay. Councillor Usher, he's logged in now. Okay, we're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Okay, for those watching from home, it is 4:15. We will be out from our closed session no later than 5:15, at which time we'll resume the public agenda. Colleagues, 5 to 5, back in public session. Let's move through the agenda. Confirmation and signing of the minutes of the 18th meeting held on June 13th, 2017. That will come up on screen in a moment. Any speakers while we're waiting for that? Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. There are no speakers, so I will call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Communications and petitions, there are none. Motions of which notice is given, none. Let's move then to our reports. This is the 12th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. The chair is not with us this evening, and Councillor Helmer is moving this report.
I'll put all items on the report forward. That's item number 2, which is about 3105 Boswick. We're lifting holding provisions there and deferring the lifting of one of them. And number 3, which is an information report from our staff about proposed changes to the London Plan and directions coming forward from Planning Committee about that.
Okay, so this is 1 through 3. Any speakers? There are none. It's been moved by Councillor Helmer. Let's open the vote. Call the question. We're voting.
3, okay. 3 and 10 is all I see from them.
So clause 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And Councillor Helmer?
Can you pull 8 separately as well?
We'll deal with 8 separately, yeah. So the entire report with the exception of 3, 8, and 10. It'll be up on screen momentarily. Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Turner. I have no speakers. I'll call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Councillor Turner?
I'll put number 3 on the floor.
On the floor, speakers, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'm happy to see this proceeding. I just have a question for our staff that I hope they can answer for me. In previous discussions, only because I'm not great at reading all the details of the subdivision agreements, but in previous discussions, this was identified as an important connection of the new part of the Foxfield subdivision with the older, which is still new in my ward, part of the Foxfield subdivision, as this creates a road connection to the, Foxwood Ave, Fox Hunt areas, to a controlled intersection at Aldersbrook Gate, where there is no controlled intersection at Foxwood Ave. And so as this development proceeds, will the road become a public access usable road in the first phase of this development so that those members of that community can access the controlled lighted intersection at Aldersbrook Gate rather than using the uncontrolled intersections which exist at all the other exits to the existing Foxfield neighborhood?
Mr. Kotsvis.
I'm sorry, but I don't know if I can answer that question, and I apologize for that, but I could look into that and advise you accordingly.
Well, I would like to know the answer to that, and I did send an email to a member of the staff. I know she has a new job now, so she may not have gotten to it. So I'd like to know that because that's a very important connection. And if we have to defer this to a later part of the meeting, I would appreciate my support of my colleagues. I certainly am happy to pass it tonight, but I do want to know that that will become, because that was discussed with the staff before when I inquired about this area. I just can't see it in the existing subdivision agreement in the way that I can understand. And so I want to ensure that that's the case. Because again, as that first phase develops, that connection is very important for members of that community to have an alternate protected exit where they can turn left onto Fanshawe Park Road with a controlled lighted intersection. And that will alleviate some of the quite frankly, asks of the constituents there for an additional lighted intersection, which is not warranted, at one of the other exits to that subdivision, as there are 3 currently and none of them have exits making left turns a little bit more challenging than they may need to be. So this would create an important connection. So I don't know if my colleagues on council are willing to wait until this item, until later in the meeting, so Mr. Kosovas could find the answer to me, but I would appreciate that if they're willing to do so.
Mr. Kotsvis has indicated that he's happy to pick up the phone and get an answer, and so we can deal with it either at the tail end of the Planning and Environment Committee report, if he has that answer. If not, we'll deal with it later in the agenda. So if we could just ask Councillor Turner, if you could please just withdraw that motion, and we'll deal with Clause 8. In Clause 8, that was Councillor Helmer, I believe.
Your worship, I put clause 8 on the floor.
And I'll recognize Councillor Helmer on Clause 8.
I said what I need to say about this one at Planning Committee. I just want to vote separately on it.
Okay, other speakers on Clause 8? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly on this one, I think Councillor Helmer's position is appropriate. I voted in favor of this one because I think it's fair for us to serve notice to the property owners as these renewals come up for a temporary surface parking lot downtown. That said, I think there's a limited life for this as a temporary surface parking lot because this will be a very desirable development site. It's directly on 2 rapid transit routes, and it needs to serve that purpose rather than being underutilized as it is now. So I think I would say, for me, if seeing this application again in 3 years' time, I would vote against it. At this time, I think it's appropriate to grant the extension.
Thank you. Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. We're voting, colleagues.
Closing the vote and the motion carries.
Kathy, Jesse.
I think I withdrew just as you were closing. I intended to vote nay, so if you could record it that way.
Record will represent Councillor Helmer voted nay, as he indicated in his comments. You want to report out again? Clerk
Closing the
Saunders?
vote and the motion carries 13-1.
Okay. And Councillor Turner?
Your Worship, I present clause number 10. I'll need somebody else to move that as I voted against it.
Okay. Looking for a member of the Planning Committee that voted in favor. Yeah, Councillor Helmer. Great. So this is going to be moved by Councillor Helmer. Councillor Turner, did you want to relinquish the floor then to Councillor Helmer?
I don't
Okay.
think he's moving.
Go ahead, Councillor Helmer.
The recommendation of committee actually is to refer it, and I believe you supported that, so perhaps you can move it. I certainly didn't.
You're quite right, because you were in the majority vote, Councillor Turner.
Apparently. My apologies. I'm not a very good chair. All right. Then I will put number 10 on the floor, the motion to refer.
Okay, motion to refer, and I will start a speakers list. Looking for anyone looking to speak to this matter. Councillor Helmer, anyone else?
Well, colleagues, I didn't support the idea of referring this matter at Planning Committee. I believe the vote was 3-2. Councillor Park was also opposed to the referral. And the reasons are that I think the application that was recommended to us by our staff is quite appropriate and is a very reasonable zoning for that site. I think the development that's proposed is very good. I think it blends into the neighborhood quite well. I think it's in a good spot in relation to the commercial development that is along Wellington, and I think it's providing a pretty good transition into that residential neighborhood that is north of the proposed development. I think the setback from the road and the 2-story podium is quite important, and it provides that kind of transition from the street level to the higher 8-story building. And then the transition at the back with the townhomes, again, I think it's very well done. The development has underground parking, which I think is very important. So I hope my colleagues will just support the application that is before us. It's been recommended to us by our staff. I don't know what we're hoping to gain through the referral. There's been extensive consultation between the applicant and our staff already on this file, and that's one of the reasons it's coming in at 8 stories with the setback from the podium and not 10 stories, which is what the applicant had in mind before they started talking to the community and our staff. So I think the 8 story is appropriate. I don't know why we take longer to come back with something very, very similar. And I don't want to make the developments worse by constantly trying to make them shorter. So I'm going to vote against the referral, and I would move the recommendation from our staff at the appropriate time if the referral fails.
Councillor Zafman, Usher, and Salee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, also will not be supporting the referral tonight. I believe that staff came forward working with the applicant on a pretty good compromise here. I think as alluded by the council already, is a very good, well-developed proposed home here. And I think, beyond that, I believe that the site itself is a good location. When we look at Wellington and Baseline, Wellington, in my mind, it's such a major arterial for the city that I think is only going to be continually developed in the near future. And I think providing people with access directly to Wellington Street Commercial Corridor, healthcare, but also being directly on a future BRT line makes a lot of sense for seniors. It makes their lives a lot easier. And I think, we recognize that London is an age-friendly city, but also a very significant senior population and growing senior population. I think we should be trying to increase the capacity for them in our community, rather than decrease it, which I think a lower tower would do that. I understand some of the concerns from the residents around there, but I do frankly think that this does fit in fairly well. Thanks.
Councillor Usher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to support the referral either. I want you to know, first of all, that it's not in my ward, but it is my stomping ground. It's pretty well my neighborhood. I do a lot of business in that area. My bank is there. The hospital is there. All the shopping that I attend is right around that, concentrate around that area. The few houses that are there, most of the neighborhood is really on High Street. You have a few houses on Baseline Road. I don't think that this 8-story building will affect them adversely at all. And the way I see this development is that on the other side of the street, the hospital at one time was going to put up a children's hospital there. They talked about it, as a matter of fact. And that was going to be a multi-story building. And I don't see the difference between this building on one side of the street and a hospital on the other side of the street. And like I said, my colleague said before, this is going to be a major node for BRT. It's going to be an appropriate place for these folks to live. They're going to be able to do a lot of their living in that area. Their shopping and banking and health and all that thing. And I think that it's a very appropriate place to put a building of this nature. And I think that 8 stories is really not too high for that location. So I'm not going to support the referral. And if the referral loses, then I'll vote in favor of the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Salee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll be brief. I won't be supporting the referral back. I think this is an ideal location. I think the applicant has showed some willingness to work with the city and has scaled back from the original 10 stories. So I think, we have an aging population. I think it makes sense. Funny enough, over the weekend, I actually heard from some seniors saying, I can't believe you guys don't want to approve of this particular item. And I assure them that I support the application. So that's what I'm doing today.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I am going to be not supporting the referral and hoping that that fails so that I can support the staff recommendation as was presented at the Planning Committee. Like my colleagues before me, I think this is a good proposal in a good space in terms of transit, healthcare, shopping, aging in place, and it will serve the community well. So I urge my colleagues to vote against the referral.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I did support this referral. I think what we are trying to do with this referral is to explore with the applicant and have a further conversation about the height of this building. To me, it is, I heard from the public the concerns about the height, and what we have here is what is allowed, a 4-story. We're going to an 8-story. We know in the past the applicant had come forward with a 10-story with 184 units. We now have an 8-story with 184 units. I understand that we have to be somehow consistent with our policies, and I'm trying to do that as a member of the Planning Committee, how we look at our policies and what's in place. I understand this is a unique situation, without a doubt, but I do think we have to be somehow consistent in understanding our policies as we move forward. That's what we're going to get with this referral back, is a discussion on that height. By supporting a referral back doesn't mean that you do not support the London Plan or BRT or seniors' buildings living in place. I think we all support that as a council, and without a doubt, this is not about that at all. I took a drive down there this weekend and looked at the location. It's on Baseline. It is moved back. Obviously, we probably wouldn't have this discussion if it was right on the corner of Wellington and Baseline, but it is moved in. It is quite a unique situation, a unique area, without a doubt, with the commercial just being further onward. But how we understand our policies, how we understand bonusing, to me, is something that is to be understood. When it comes to bonusing, I understand there's a number of things that have been done with the applicant and staff, working with the two-story podium, having the setback, and the use of low-impact development there. There is a concern with water and the bioswales that will be used in this sensitive area for stormwater management, is to be applauded. But I want to go back to the height and the concern that height does give a community when it comes to shadowing. I understand the applicant, and thank him for presenting the results of the shade study. It shows that there are concerns, there will be concerns in the late fall and winter months for shading for a number of residents in the community. So we as a council, how do we determine that right now? I think it needs to be further explored by referring it back. And I would encourage us to understand that trying to understand our bonusing, how that works, and to me, it's a further conversation that we need to understand bonusing when it comes to affordable housing, inclusionary units, how all that works, how does it benefit the community? And I have a number of questions and concerns about it, but I will just stay with the height and the concerns that I have there. And again, I'm supportive of that referral back.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have much to add to my colleagues. However, I won't be supporting the referral. I understand there's been extensive dialogue on this application. And quite frankly, when we talk about walkability, you look at the location of it with the hospitals so close at hand, shopping close at hand, community amenities close at hand. It's hard to imagine not supporting increased density on this site. And I know that four stories is increased density, but this seems to be ideal for more than just that. So.
Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I also supported the referral back at planning. I'm glad that Councillor Hopkins brought up the London Plan as an example. The London Plan contemplates 4 stories at this site. If the London Plan was in force in effect, we wouldn't even be looking at official plan amendments, because the new Planning Act says that there will be a 2-year moratorium on official plan amendments when there's a brand new official plan in place. So this isn't 8 stories is not what is right now allowed or would be allowed under the London Plan. So we need to consider that. And I'm going to repeat what I say all the time. Infill doesn't mean, our infill policies do not mean we accept any and all infill. Intensification is anything that's more than what's currently there. And our policies state clearly in multiple places throughout the current official plan that new developments, new infill developments, intensification must be sensitive to the surrounding areas. These are small houses that are directly across the street and that surround this site. And this is a very narrow road at this point. This is not Fanshawe Park Road, which is a 4-lane arterial road, which doesn't cast shadow across the street to the homes across the street. This does cast shadow. This building will cast shadow on the homes across the street. During the winter months, people say, well, it's cloudy already and it's dark already and it's winter and it's gloomy. So this just makes it even gloomier for these homeowners in these single-story homes across the street. So I recognize it's close to, well, excuse me, it's close to Wellington Road, but it is not, as Councillor Hopkins said, it is not right at the corner. We're not saying, by referring this back, we're not saying no to development on this site. We're not saying no to infill or intensification on this site. We're just asking for staff to work a little bit harder with the applicant to try to come up with a height that's more reasonable at this location and to come up with something that is a better fit in this neighborhood.
Any other speakers? Okay, it's going to be a close vote, so I'm going to speak to this. So Deputy Mayor Huber, if you take the chair, please.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. You know, colleagues, I think that we all understand that every application has its challenges. No solution is ever perfect. But for me, when I review the staff recommendation to proceed with this development, for the reasons articulated in that staff report, I'm compelled to do so. Yeah, this application is in a neighborhood type place, which normally would only allow 4-story buildings in the London plan. But applications for buildings taller than that are site specific. And we have an application before us that has been vetted very carefully by staff. Staff have worked very closely with the proponent, and they've come up with a project that is subject to some bonusing, some very appropriate bonusing in my opinion. This is a very high quality building. The urban design is very appropriate. This will be, I think, a very important building for this area. All of the reasons stated before, it's on a rapid transit corridor. It is adjacent to a commercial node. It's in an area that's going to see increased intensification over the long term. This is likely the first of many projects in this area. And so when you look at this project, I don't want you to just look at it today, colleagues, if you're on the fence. I want you to look 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road. Think about our vision for the community. Remember that collectively as a council, we made a commitment for a 45% development on infill development. And we did that because we wanted to stop seeing development at the fringes of our community. And so this is an opportunity to follow through on that commitment, that very ambitious commitment that, by the way, wasn't recommended by staff. We raised the bar as a council even higher. The last point I want to make is that we do have an aging population. That Councillor Salee covered that, Councillor Zafman and others spoke about that, and we need to find appropriate places for our residents to age in place. This does exactly that, and I can't think of another more critical question to put in my mind than if we're not going to approve a development here that's being supported by staff, that the proponent has worked very hard to come up with a very high quality development, then where are we going to approve these developments? And I see a referral back as a signal. It would be a signal to our community that we're not sure about that commitment of building inward and upward. And I say that respectfully because I know this is a difficult issue, but in my mind, this is the way to go. I'll be voting against the referral, and I hope that the referral fails, and I'll be supporting the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers on the matter? Okay. Councillor Turner, you want to wrap up?
Thank you. I don't want to beleaguer this point or belabor this point or whatever I do with the point. This isn't a huge thing, right? This is a building that checks all the right boxes. It's intensification. it's seniors, but I don't think that should enter into our discussion at all. We zone property use, not who lives there. We can't do that. When we talk about students and whether they're going to live someplace, we cannot do that. So we can't do the same thing with seniors as well. So that has to come out of your debate. But what this is a question, well, back to the merits of the building. It's good intensification, it's good design, it places underground parking, it combines it with townhomes, it's got good usage, it's good access, it's close to commercial centers, it's close to the hospital, it's close to rapid transit, it's got all that great stuff. But the mayor just asked a question, if we're not going to put it here, where are we going to put it? Well, he also reminded us collectively as a council, we supported the Rapid Transit Initiative, but I'd also remind you, 12 months ago, almost to the day, we unanimously supported the London Plan. And the London Plan tells us, if not here, where. It tells us exactly where it goes. It tells us exactly how high it's going to be. The whole purpose of the London Plan was to avoid these conflicts. It anticipated, we mapped out where the rapid transit routes were going to be. We said where transit villages were going to be. We said where the intensification was going to go. And now we're saying, let's just keep going a little bit more, right? So let's look 10, 20, 30 years down the road. The concern is, and why we wrote the London Plan, why staff did such amazing work, and how come we spent so much time consulting with the community, was to figure out where appropriate adjacencies went, where appropriate intensification went. Nobody's saying don't build multi-unit, multi-family, medium-density residential on the site. I don't think that you heard that at all from the committee when we had the debate. They said, yeah, this is the right type of development here. But if you look at the London Plan, this is a neighborhood connector. And the whole purpose of stating the street types is to say, this is what density is appropriate at this point. So we don't have to have official plan amendments. We're trying to avoid OPAs down the road over and over and over again. The plan was designed in such a way to say, okay, let's think 10, 20, 30 years down the road to say what's appropriate where, how the density transitions from low to medium to high. Well, if you think on the corner, that is right on the rapid transit corridor and would be zoned appropriately for 12 stories, with bonusing up to 16. This, in the London Plan form, would be appropriate for 4 stories, with bonusing up to 6. So all the nice pieces that we get through bonusing are achieved at 6 stories, because that's above the 4 stories that's permitted by right. If you take a look at our current official plan, again, we're looking at 4 stories. In fact, actually, it's single-family residential. We're looking for an official plan amendment to allow us to go to medium-density multifamily unit residential, which, again, contemplates 4 stories with bonusing up to 6. So we're going twice as high. And like I said, this is not a hill to die on, but I think it's an important test of whether we actually live the plan that we collectively wrote and collectively passed, and what's going to happen every time we say, well, it's just outside. Are we going to continuously grant those exceptions over and over and over again, in which case, is the London Plan worth the paper it's written on? I think we have to look very carefully at each one of these cases, because the signal we send is not we're closed for development. It's, yeah, we can change the plan. Because we've said really clearly, if not here, then where? We said where. So I think the referral back was appropriate. It's why I put it forward, because I think 6 stories is probably what's contemplated, and 6 stories is what we should aim to achieve, and 6 stories is what can accomplish the bonusing, all the features that are associated with it, and 6 stories provides for an appropriate transition from the single families to the 3-story walk-ups to a 6-story building to the 12 to 16-story building that'll be next to it. So that's why I'd urge you to support the referral and not defeat it.
Any other speakers, colleagues? Okay, so this is on the referral. It's been moved by Councillor Turner. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion is lost, 4-10.
Councillor Helmer? Councillor Salih?
Sorry, some technical difficulties. My vote was a nay. I don't want to do a reconsideration, but if they'll record it appropriately.
It happens. I'll just look to the clerk and ask her to record Councillor Salih's vote as a nay and just change the voting record accordingly. Thank you. Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. I'd like to put the original staff recommendation on the floor.
Okay, the clerk will distribute the original staff recommendation. It will come up on screen as well. You going to second that? Yeah. Okay. Seconded by Councillor Salih. Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Salih. Any speakers on the motion, the staff recommendation? Okay, there are none, so let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries, 11-3.
Okay, colleagues, and Councillor Turner, just before we leave this agenda item, I'll look to Mr. Kotsovas. Do you have an answer for Councillor Morgan's question at this time?
Through your worship, I believe the answer is yes. Just looking through the special provisions that we've included in the bottoms of page 18 and 19 and of the PEC agenda, and I believe all the information is there for the councillor.
Councillor Morgan.
So Mr. Kotsovas was nice enough to, and thank you for the long debate because it gave him time to look this up. I'm satisfied with the way that he's interpreted the agreements in that section of the subdivision agreement, that Medway Park Drive as well as Silver Fox Drive will receive completed connections as part of the phase 1 of the subdivision agreement in this area, which will be of a great benefit to the residents in that area. And I will probably flag for Ms. Scher that I expect at some point people are going to ask about the lighted intersection and left turn advanced signals. That I'm not asking about that today, but I think as that connection completes, there will be some additional discussions on the intersection in the future. It's a very hot topic area. So thank you, Mr. Kotsovas, for answering my question.
And heads up, Ms. Scher. Okay. Any other speakers on clause 3? Okay, let's get it up on screen if we could, please. Moved by Councillor Turner. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries, 14-0.
Okay, eighth report of Community and Protective Services Committee. Councillor Salih.
I'll put the entire, no, never mind. Number 2 is being pulled.
Colleagues, we're going to deal with separately clause 2, 3, 10, 12, and 6. So let's move the balance of the report. Councillor Slee, if I could get you to move that motion, please. Any speakers on the balance of the report with the exception of 2, 3, 6, 10, and 12? Okay. There are no speakers, so let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Councillor?
I just wanted to point a technical part just for the clerks and they could figure it out, because I don't know if it has an impact, but on the agenda reports, Councillor Cassidy's name isn't being recorded under the votes portion there, so I'll just throw that out for now. So I don't know if that is an issue.
So Councillor Cassidy's, it's indicated in the agenda that she was not there?
So on the agenda where it shows the votes, her name's not there, but she was there and did vote.
For each of the votes
For
in the
each of the
committee?
votes, correct, yeah. So I'm not sure if that is an issue.
I'm looking at the report now. I'm just looking at consent item 2, and I see, is it 6 and 7? 5, 6, and 7. And I'll just look to Councillor Cassidy. Were you in attendance for agenda items 5, 6, and 7? Okay. So we'll have to look into that. It looks like something was missed within the system. And thanks for flagging that, Councillor Salee. Okay, let's move then to clause 2. This is the London Strengthening Neighbourhood Strategy 2017 to 2022. Speakers? Councillor Squire.
I spoke against 2A at committee, and I just wanted the opportunity to vote against that. So if you could split them out, and I'll continue my vote.
That was 2A, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's deal with 2A first. Any speakers? Let's call the question on 2. Well, let's have it up on screen. Take a deep breath. There it is on 2A, moved by Councillor Salee. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-1.
Clause 3. 2B. That is the question. Whether it is nobler. Moved by Councillor Salee. Let's call the question. Voting. Life is but a stage.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Number 3.
Clause 3, colleagues. Speakers? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll be supporting number 3, which is, again, moving ahead with the East London Community Centre. Your Worship, at the committee, I wanted to recognize our staff, our senior leadership team, and everybody involved for their support and their hard work on this project. There's been many, many public meetings, and our staff has been there and been great as far as, you know, working with the community, making sure they understood what the project was, what it would look like, when it would be built, and everything else. And myself, I'd like to personally thank all our staff for what they've done over the years. This is a project that dates back, originally talked about, asked for. Geez, I guess it'd be maybe 12 years ago now. Way back then, we had a small group of individuals who came to council to explain, and on behalf of the community, why we needed this facility. It is desperately needed, and it's going to make a very big difference in all of East London. And so, again, I'd like to thank everybody, including those community representatives that were here way back when for coming and speaking in favor of it. And again, thanks again to Council for supporting that.
Other speakers, clause 3, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So I just want to rise and acknowledge my colleague, Councillor Armstrong, because if there's a drum that Councillor Armstrong has beat and beat long and hard, it has been for this facility. So I know he can put a big smile on his face as he sees this moving forward.
Other speakers? Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. Certainly, I echo that it's going to be a great project for East London, and I'm glad to see it coming forward. I would point out, we've had a couple of facility-related budget increases, both during our last budget amendments where we were talking about the cost of some of the libraries and the kind of square footage costs we're expecting to have for those facilities. And some of them have resulted in pushing things off. One of the ways we've handled it is by deferring the project. So a couple of points on this one. I'm glad that we're not deferring this project. I think it's important and needs to be done on the timeline that we're talking about. And I'm glad that we have expected savings in the other project, the Southwest project, that we think we can use to offset the expected increase in budget on this one. I do support this kind of approach, but I think as we look at a lot of the capital projects that have facilities associated with them, I think we need to be thinking very carefully about whether those capital estimates are still accurate, especially the ones that are further on in the 10-year capital plan. I know we made some amendments last time, but I'm expecting we might have more and more of these amendments as we get closer to finalizing some of these tenders and we start getting pricing back. And I think that's going to be an ongoing pressure in our budget deliberations coming up in the fall and going into the winter. So I do support the approach taken by our staff, and I think it's very prudent. It's nice to be able to have projects that are under budget to cover off these occasional times where you have cost pressures the other way.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Number 6 was pulled.
Clause 6. Someone pulled that for discussion? Councillor Van Holst?
I received the clarification I hoped for on this item.
Okay, thank you. So it'll be moved momentarily by Councillor Salee. And I have Councillor Hopkins. Clause 6.
Yes, since it has been pulled, I just would like to make a comment on the outdoor extreme weather protocol, and understand we are just receiving this for information, but through you, your worship, I would like to, I think it's important to have a greater conversation about what we do when we come across, I guess, dogs in situations, and would like to ask through you to staff, what is the protocol when we do come across dogs?
Through your worship, if there's a dog in distress that, or perceived to be in distress, that there's a significant concern, obviously, you know, if you can contact the homeowner or make them aware, it'd be ideal. If not, the Humane Society would be your best avenue for investigation and consideration on their part.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Number 10 clause.
Okay, clause 10. Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. I probably didn't have to pull this, and you're probably wondering why I was pulling a delegation request, because I wholeheartedly support the delegation request. But I thought I would take this opportunity to ask Mr. Kostovich to help us to understand the caps and limits on the taxi plate licensing. I understand that we have a significant wait list. Maybe we can have an idea of when more plates would be released, if that's being reviewed now by Civic Administration in light of other amendments we've made to the vehicle for license bylaw.
Through your worship, there is limits on the number of taxi plates available, and they are typically reviewed based on a population basis as per the bylaw. I can't comment as to whether there's any available at this current time or not. I think we released a number last year, but I'm not sure if there'll be any more this year.
Thank you. So I understand 2 were released last year, and since that time, we've got the 2016 census results, which do show a significant population change for the City of London. So I expect this fall, the committee will see a report recommending the release of additional plates to accommodate the population. I look forward to hearing the delegation from I believe it's Mr. Barbin, in regards to request. I think there's a variety of different opinions out there within the community about how they would like to see these taxi plates licensed and regulated. So I think having that delegation come forward will have another point of view for the committee to look at, and that will hopefully be ahead of the annual release of the additional plates that match population. And I do encourage the committee to put some consideration into the ratio for the plate to population in light of the delegation.
Other speakers? Okay, the clause has been moved. Councillor Salih, let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Clause 12.
Clause 12?
Thank you, and I apologize to the committee chair. I did not have an opportunity to watch the video. I tried to watch it later that night, but I realized there's a 24-hour delay even on YouTube, and I thought that would be more instantaneous and I would have that chance, but I did not. So I didn't follow the debate, but I do wonder if there was an opportunity to speak to some of the reasons behind the thefts that are occurring that the chair, brought to the attention of the committee. So I was looking for a little bit more explanation about the committee meeting and what the discussion and the flavor of the discussion was at that meeting.
Councillor Salih, as chair and as the mover of the motion, would you please provide some context?
I think the flavor was like pretty flavorful, I guess, as always. But Squire's there, so it's pretty good. But no, I think to answer your question, I think it was a good conversation. I think committee was, wanted to have a conversation. Councillor Squire did raise some concerns, as he normally does with certain items that I bring forward. Nonetheless, I think there's definitely a conversation where, for me, I felt that this was important to have because I have some concerns where items are being stolen, having previous conversations with people in law enforcement and as well as our own staff here. I think there's an opportunity where we can modernize this technology, which is already being deployed in Edmonton, to kind of address some of these thefts that are being, stolen goods that are being sold at secondhand dealers. So I'm hoping I answered your question because I'm not too sure if I did or did not, but it wasn't too long of a conversation.
Thank you to the chair. I understand the point of the committee's recommendation is for staff to report back with more information. So this is an item I will be following. I'm not one that's typically in favor of additional regulations. And I see this as an area that we may put in additional regulations or legislation which will impact some businesses and maybe have some potentially negative consequences. That being said, I think that some of this is more of a symptom of a larger issue than an issue into itself. And I think that while we would regulate the legal processes by which people are selling, there's still many secondary markets that we're unable to regulate. So I will watch this file come back. I don't know where I'm going to land on it, but I certainly look forward to staff's information on it. And I thank the chair for his explanation of the debate.
So to utilize my 5 minutes, which I won't, but just to sum up, I think the other part is traditionally, this essentially you can consider that this requirement already exists for them, but what they have to do now is they actually have to fax it over to the police in a very archaic, old school kind of way. So what we're saying is let's modernize, let's actually make it more efficient where police can actually be able to read some of the documents, because what I've heard of concerns is sometimes it's you can't even read it because it's being faxed over. You're not getting information that's up to speed and accurate and concise. So I think when you do this way and head this direction, you can actually have a benefit of that existing regulations that are in place and just modernize it as part of the bigger conversation, which with all our bylaws, which is the modernization of the City of London bylaws. So hopefully when it comes back, you all will support it.
There are no additional speakers, so I'll call the question. That's right. Mr. Kotsvis?
Through your worship, we'll be conversing with the police and the pawnbrokers, stakeholders, and coming back, we believe, in July with some recommendations for you.
Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, let's move then to Corporate Services Committee, 21st report. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to put the entire report on the floor, but I'll be looking for my colleagues to pull various one. I see a hand. Number 15 will be pulled. 17.
3
is being pulled. Okay. I do want to note a very good report on item number 6, which is the industrial land strategy. We're keeping our pricing the same, but staff did a good job of analyzing where we're at and the progress of that strategy as well.
Okay, clause 1, 2, 4 to 14 and 16 moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any speakers? Councillor Helmer?
Just briefly on item number 9, we had a good discussion about it at committee. I'm glad to see that the investment mix has actually shifted much closer towards what the policy targets for the investments are, and that results in us earning more money on the investments that we're making. Last year it was a little bit out, a little bit under in a couple of areas, and this year it's much more closely tracking the actual target mix. I think the estimate probably is an extra $1 million earned on those investments compared to the year before if we'd had the same kind of target mix. So congratulations to our staff.
Other speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Armstrong? Councillor Armstrong? Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
We'll put clause 3 pertaining to billboard advertising tender on the floor.
Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and your worship. And through you, I'd just like to ask staff to describe where we're going with the direction of these tenders.
Is that one for Mr. Warner? Ms. Barbone?
Through your worship, just to give you a quick update. So when we were trying to bring this forward, it was trying to also match it with the timing of the signed bylaw to be able to give you an update as to where we were going with this. So there's kind of two parts that will go in parallel with this. One is the current process that we have outlined in the report, which is an RFP to move forward with the tender for the existing 8 sites that we have for billboards to continue on. We have some timing issues with respect to the end of the lease up until October that we need to get that going forward. So that will be something that this report speaks to clearly, that we'll be moving forward with that so that we can ensure there's no break in timing and allow, if there's a change in proponent, that there's time to ensure that that happens before the lease is up. The concurrent process is with respect to the 19 sites that are there, we have done some further work with respect to looking at those. And it appears that there could be up to 9 sites that could have a potential for looking at potentially some interest for a billboard. So what we're going to recommend is that we're looking at moving forward and having potential request for interest to parties, and that we can undertake that process concurrently with the RFP for the existing sites to see if there's any interest in looking at others. We know that there are about 10 sites for sure that we are not able to move forward on, specifically due to the natural heritage features, the Conservation Authority, stormwater management, et cetera. But there are some potential sites that we would like to be able to take some time and investigate to see if there's anything there. And then at the end of that process, we would bring forward that to council to see if there's, depending on the trade-offs that are there, that council could provide some direction to in terms of how to move forward.
Thank you very much. And I also wanted to thank staff. I believe they're going to be looking at some community messaging in the RFP. That's correct, yes. So I had the opportunity to talk to a number of groups about just the possibility of London taking control of its digital signscape for the purposes of community messaging, and it was interesting to hear some of the comments and the other ideas. I've expressed a number with you, but I was at the Tourism London AGM, and there was expressed quite a bit of excitement about this because we're always trying to attract more conferences to our convention center, and the possibility of having a sign welcoming conferees as they come into the town would provide quite a value added. And if you could imagine through the city as well, some even wayfinding, welcome junior hockey fans, turn left at the third light. Those kinds of things would make London something a little more special. And I think you all received a letter from the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy Committee who had discussed this, and they would not only be looking to participate in the program, but would be requesting priority access in the case of some emergency messaging, which has the potential to save lives in London. So this, I think it's quite exciting what's possible, and I hope that we can all capture that vision at some point in the future regarding some of these sites. I'll probably be coming forward to council asking for us to do a pilot on actually owning one of these things. I believe that this is a kind of investment that would be valuable and very doable for London. It was brought up at our audit committee meeting that we've got $270 million in cash. And one perspective we could take on as Londoners in terms of investing is realize we should look at things that could pay for themselves within a year and then invest in those things. And once they pay themselves back, put it back into our $270 million, and we'd have a new asset, something that's added to our community. These particular billboards, the digital ones, pay back, I think, 2 to 4 years. So that falls into that category where we could make an investment, it pays for itself, and then all of a sudden we've got a tool that we can use for some of these exciting ideas that the community has come up with. So that's what you might expect from me. And but I hope that you'll support this, and I do want to thank staff for their continued work on this.
Okay, that's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any other speakers? Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
15.
Mr. Mayor, I'll put item number 15 on the floor, which pertains to council expense
Councillor Ritter.
policy.
Thank you. Once again, this was a meeting I did not have the opportunity to watch the video of, so I wondered if the chair of the committee could give me an understanding of the presentation and discussion at the committee level regarding this item.
I'd be pleased to. We received some communication from Councillor Van Holst. There was little desire at this point for an open debate on this because it has been debated a number of times at committee, and the committee decided simply to receive the communication from the councillor.
Thank you. It was an impression given to me, and again, I did not watch the video, that the councillor making the submission did not have an opportunity to discuss his proposal and have a discussion with the committee. I would much prefer that committee work is done at the committee level, and so I would like to refer this to the governance working group for further discussion so that the councillor has the opportunity to discuss his proposal as well as a general review of the councillor expense policy at the governance working group. So at this time, I would make that referral.
Okay, we've got a motion. It's been seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Deputy Mayor Hubert, I'll start a speakers list.
I'd be happy to support the referral. That's, I think, the best place for it because it had been debated at the committee a number of times, and so I'd be happy to support that.
Other speakers, I'll look to the seconder of the motion. Did you want to speak, Councillor Van Holst? And then I'll recognize Councillor Morgan and Helmer. Okay, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I think we shouldn't spend a lot of time on this because, quite frankly, we're reviewing all of the council policies at the governance working group, which includes this policy. So regardless of how we vote, we're actually going to be reviewing all of our policies through the governance working group anyways. So I just think this is one not to really debate to death because we've already set direction to review our policy framework.
Councillor Helmer.
So I just want to get a question. There's a recommendation coming from committee. Is the councillor suggesting referring receipt of the communication?
Thank you. My understanding was the councillor submission was that this be discussed or referred to governance working group instead of actually being referred out of committee or recommended. My understanding was that the committee only received the communication, which does not refer it. Councillor Morgan was quite correct in his assertion that all of our expenses will be referred, but I think that there's an interest from the councillor to have this specifically referred for discussion sooner rather than later to governance working group. So my motion is that the policy be referred to governance working group for discussion.
Okay, so I'll repeat some of the things I said at committee. I hope that this is not referred to governance working group. We have all kinds of things we already have to deal with at governance working group. We have debated the council expense policy in this room of council a couple of times, including a number of times when we want to have exceptions to that policy, the vast majority of which I have opposed. I understand where Councillor Van Holst is coming from. I know he wants the policy to be different and to be structured in a fundamentally different way. I do not think that there's a majority of councillors who actually agree with that, and I would like to not discuss it and deal with it at a working group and then deal with it at a standing committee and then deal with it at council to make no changes in the end. I think we have discussed it. I don't support it. I haven't heard any good arguments to convince me that I should support the kind of way that he's talking about having the expense policy, and I'm just not going to support having a discussion about it.
Other speakers? I have Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. The councillor says that he hadn't heard any good arguments to change his mind, and I'm afraid that was the case at committee. I'd come forward because I wanted a discussion to take place about the lack of agility that's allowed councillors, and I think I have a different approach for that, and wanted to express some of the reasons for it. So there was a bit of irony in my mind, is that looking for a way to cut the red tape, asking for a discussion about that, and it's the very body that would govern that red tape also refused to entertain the discussion about it. So I think it's reasonable that we have this discussion. The the governance working group is the perfect place for that discussion. So I think it's reasonable that this be put forward. I see no reason not to. And if we're going to discuss it anyway, it seems, it would seem strange to say that this particular issue not be included in those discussions. So I hope that you would support this. When I brought it forward, it was really just as a formality in our policy. When we want discussions to take place at the governance working group, we bring them here and say, this is what I would like to be discussed. And after 2.5 years or so gone by, I think there's time to look into this situation again. If I have to support this a little bit through a discussion, I would say, could you imagine cutting off all your fingers? Well, all of a sudden you don't have a nimble appendage. And I think that's what I experience with our present policy, is that every new idea has to go through the Corporate Services Committee, and that can take 2 to 5 weeks to happen. I know that now I represent council on a couple of groups, the Food Policy Council, the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy, groups that didn't exist when we made the decision about our policies. And I've seen a couple situations where I could have used some resources to make something happen in these groups, which are also a council policy, so a priority. So there's one reason where a little agility would be valuable. I can have some others, but again, we didn't want to have the debate here, but I just wanted to make the point that the discussion would be valuable, and I think there could be some valuable results from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. On the referral, Councillor Squire.
I'll be voting against the referral. I think Councillor Morgan is quite right, Mr. Chair, that it's eventually going to be dealt with, but I think at this point in time, I don't want to be putting myself in a position where I'm indicating this is something I want to discuss over other things, or that I have some interest in, and I certainly don't have an interest in changing the way we've been doing things. We only have so much time to do the work we need to do, and I think every time we add something or give it precedence, I think we're taking away from time we could be doing, in my view, more valuable things. And also, when we start talking about our own expenses again, it's something that takes attention away from the really good work that we do, so I won't be supporting the referral.
Other speakers? Councillor Turner?
I'll do it really quickly. Thank you, Your Worship. I'll support the referral. I think it's appropriate. I think what Councillor Van Holst is asking is at the time that we are reviewing our council expense policies, as Councillor Morgan had talked about, that his proposal be considered in concert with that. I don't think it's anything more than that. I think it's quite appropriate, and I would agree with Councillor Van Holst. I do think the expense policies are rather restricting, and I think there is room to try and make sure that they're a little more up to date. I think we swung the pendulum completely the way to. As opposed to where they were previously, to try and figure out how to make us more accountable, and I think we should be, absolutely. But I think we went a little too far in terms of restricting what activity and what could be done and what couldn't be done with the expense funds. Yeah. Nonetheless, I'm not looking for new and interesting ways to spend money. I'm looking for ways that allow us to execute the duties of being a councillor within our wards, consistent with the expense policy and making sure that that's up to date and appropriate. So I'd ask you to support the referral.
Councillor Salee, and I know Councillor Ridley wants to wrap up.
Thank you, through the chair. And just had a quick question. So I know the councillor who brought this forward has a wording. So is that the wording that we'd be actually voting on, or is that what will be showed up on future agendas where it says, that the governance working group be directed to consider possibility of changing the council policy from a white list where only certain expenses are expressly allowed to a black list where only certain expenses are expressly prohibited? I just wanted to.
I think, if I may, what's on the floor is what's on your screen, which is the matter of review of council expense policy referred to the governance working group with no prescriptive direction to it. And to that end, Councillor Van Holst's suggestion may be one of 6 different things that could be considered.
Okay, thank you, perfect, and that really helps clear it up, and that makes it easier for me to vote. I don't want to point anything out, I know it's just the English language and the way it has been, but I just wanted to kind of just be observant of the fact that sometimes when words like blacklist and whitelist are kind of on there, I'm just, just hesitant to vote for words that have those kind of connotations.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Okay, Councillor Ridley, to sum up.
Thank you. So I hope that people will support the referral. As it's been indicated, we are already going to be reviewing the expenses. My intent to move this motion is not an indication of support or lack of support for this specific idea, but rather to include this idea in the discussion. Councillor Van Holst does not sit on the governance working group. Should he not be there, I would want to ensure that his submission is included as part of our discussion, as would anything when we do this review. I think that this is work that when people have ideas and they want to bring forward, it should be done at the committee level, and this is why I'm sending it back to the appropriate committee so that this work can get done there. So I hope people support the referral.
Thank you. Other speakers? There are none. Let's call the question on the referral. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10-2.
7.
And I believe finally, if I got my numbers right, item number 17.
Speakers to 17? Okay. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. There are no speakers, so I'm going to call the question.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-1.
Deputy Mayor Hubert, you're just warming up. Let's go to the 6th report of the Audit Committee.
I'm excited to present the 6th report of the Audit Committee because it's a good report. We did receive the financial statements of the city, and we had a good discussion about that, and I'll put the entire report on it. We had I think what would be considered to make, perhaps Ms. Barbone, in her function as city treasurer, would like to comment on our financial statements, but I'll put both items 1, 2, and 3 on the floor.
Mr. Hayward, sit back down. Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, I think overall we're very pleased to present the financial statements. I think what you see and is evident in the financial statements is some very strong fiscal accountability and very strong movement in terms of ensuring our liquidity in the future and maintaining another year of AAA credit rating, which is obviously our key target to proceed forward. There were a couple of findings that we're working on in terms of strengthening our control environment moving forward, but certainly very, very positive results in our financial statements and certainly showing we're moving in the right direction and would like to keep moving in that right direction.
I think we do need to continue to note that 40 years in a row of AAA is a pretty good thing. I don't know what the record is. I'd be really interested in knowing in the municipal sector if we're anywhere close to, the Guinness Book of Records or anything like that. But I also do want to note, Mr. Mayor, that from a debt perspective, our debt per household continues to go down. That we're managing our risk appropriately, we're managing the resources that we have, and it actually connects to Councillor Helmer's earlier comment on our investments. We're handling those appropriately, and actually to that end, we're looking for increased latitude that may be coming down from the province to allow us to leverage those assets, liquid assets, in a better way to get an increased return for the city, which are all positive because we get an increased return to the city. It means we've got a little bit more capacity to deal with projects like we had mentioned earlier, where our costs may be a little higher than initially expected, or to lower the tax increases that might be required as we go forward. So all in all, the audit committee was supportive of this. Our auditors are quite pleased with what's happening at the city, and so I'm pleased to present this report.
Other speakers? Councillor Helmer?
Just to tack on a couple of points that I think are important. Just looking at 2014 as the sort of base year, our debt is down. This is the part attributable to general rates. It's down about 11%, right? The amount of debt we have attributable to that. Our interest payments on the debt are down about 10.5%. This is just based on 2 years ago. Similarly, our reserves and our reserve funds are up almost 20%. This is total dollars in a couple of years. And I think that shows the kind of financial discipline that we have in our staff and frankly, as a council, that we set out in the capital plan, in our plans for the reserve funds, and how we're financing the expenditures that we are making, especially capital expenditures, especially pay-as-you-go life cycle capital work. I know it hits the taxpayers when we have to go to the property tax levy to pay for some of these capital works, but in the long run, it's a much better approach than financing them through debt, which is the easier thing to do, but in the long run, much more expensive, especially when it comes to life cycle. I just want to point these things out because sometimes the extremely good financial performance of the city goes unnoticed. It's because it happens all the time. It kind of fades into the background, and I think it's worth pointing it out.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you. And I think the financial reports are a good news story, and I'd echo my colleagues' comments to that. Councillor Helmer raised the point about reserves and reserve funds. I think this is one that we discussed fairly well at Audit Committee, and it's one that we should watch over the next few years. They're growing appropriately, but I think we want to make sure that as we address them, that our reserve funds are right-sized, and that we know exactly what the indicators are to make sure that our contributions and our drawdowns on reserve funds are appropriate at the right times. And I think finding the right tweak in that is one of the keys to being able to be sure that the taxation levels as they are set appropriately, and that we have good, balanced and stable taxation rates from year to year, rather than seeing the jumps up and down, as has happened in the past, and we could quite possibly be prone to in the future if we're not aware and live to where those reserve funds need to be balanced. So I think we've done quite well, and I think we've had great stewardship through our finance department, and I think that reflects very much so in these statements here. So thank you.
Other speakers? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Going for the hat trick, Deputy Mayor Hubert. I wonder if you'd...
Just one final point on that. It would be wonderful if members of the media would report on the financial statements. That would be a great article. I'm sure it would lead tomorrow's news, both in digital and in print. 18th report of council in closed session. We have several items to report. First of all, that is a procedural matter pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001. Following recommendation be forwarded to council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether the recommendation should be forwarded to council for deliberation and vote in public session, that on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Service with respect to city-owned industrial land located in the southeast end of Swiftsure Court in Trafalgar Industrial Park, Phase 3, containing an area approximately 3.5 acres, being composed of part of a lot 3 Plan 33M-239, except Part 1, Plan 33R9640, as outlined on the sketch here to attach Schedule A. The following actions be taken. The offer submitted by 2499771 Ontario Corporation be to purchase subject property from the city at a purchase price of $192,500, reflected at the sale price of $55,000 per acre, as outlined on the location map. The purchaser agreeing to approximately 0.3 acre service easement to run from Swiftsure Court to the southerly abutting parcel to accommodate a future purchaser be accepted. Based on the following, that as a procedural matter, the same procedural matter, I'll just put it that way, that on the recommendation of the same Managing Director, Corporate Services, City Treasurer, and Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services with respect to city-owned industrial land located on the southeast end of Swiftsure Court in Trafalgar Industrial Park, Phase 3, containing an area of approximately 1 acre, being comprised of part of Lot 3, Plan 33M-239, except Part 1 on Plan 33R9640 as outlined on the sketch here to Schedule A, the following actions be taken. The offer submitted by the Corporation of the County of Middlesex to purchase subject property from the city at a purchase price of $55,000, reflecting a sale price of $55,000 per acre as outlined on the location map. An initial building coverage of 5.7% in place of the required 15% be accepted. The purchaser satisfy itself within 75 days from the date of acceptance to examine title at its own expense. The purchaser satisfy itself within 60 days from the date of acceptance with the result of its own due diligence with respect to the property. The purchaser satisfy itself within 60 days from the date of acceptance that there are no reasonable objection from the Crumlin Homeowners Association for its proposed use of the property by the purchaser, and the city granting the purchaser the service easement at a nominal consideration over part of the budding city lands for a service connection for the ambulance station. That on a procedural matter, the same procedural matter, ironically enough, that on the recommendation of the city manager, the following actions be taken. The proposed confidentiality stream proposed by external legal counsel be endorsed, and the city manager be authorized to take all actions necessary for their implementation, and the city solicitor be directed to develop administrative guidelines and procedures regarding the management of client conflicts for newly hired solicitors. Is that it, Madam Chair? Madam Clerk?
Moved by
And I will also note, Mr. Mayor, that there was
progress.
progress on several other items.
Some very good progress. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any other discussion? Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, I just want to speak to the C2, which is the purchase on Swiftsure Court by London Middlesex Ambulance. I think this is a good news story in a lot of ways. First of all, a number of years ago, the Argyle had in the ambulance service, they deployed an ambulance at our fire station on Trafalgar Street. Now, we certainly appreciate the ambulance being there, but the fact is they were working out of a trailer, and that's not the best situation. So now East London Argyle is going to have a new ambulance station. I haven't seen the actual drawings, but I would assume it'll be more than one bay. It's 2,500 square feet. And so this will mean at least the current deployment will be there, and there's room for more. And I think that's a good news for the area. I guess the thing is, also the location I think will be a little better. Currently where it is, we have ambulance and fire, and they're going right out onto the street, and it's a lot of alarms, I can tell you. I don't live far away, and I'm glad I don't live right behind. So I think this will be a better location, and it'll allow for more coverage. We appreciate the decision to have it there because it could have been located somewhere else. But I think this is a very good location. It's a good location because It's out onto Trafalgar, down Crumlin, and you're at the airport. You know, and also out Trafalgar, you're onto Veterans Memorial, you're right out to the 401, or of course you can go north, Veterans Memorial. So I think it's an excellent location. I'm glad that they're going to have proper facilities for the crews, because what's there now is not, well, while they've made do, this will be better. So in any event, I think, and it's good use of this land, which quite frankly, there's a little land left in that subdivision, and it's sort of gotten to the point where some of it's harder to get rid of than being out pieces of land out by the 401. So we look forward to the new building and hopefully more deployments of ambulance in our area and better coverage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Other speakers? Let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Colleagues, we're just coming up on our 6:20 recognition. What I'm going to suggest is that we work our way through the agenda, do the bylaws, we'll do the recognition immediately afterwards, and invite our guest up for dinner to join us. So it might take 10 or so minutes. If you could please let our guests know. Thank you. Let's move then through deferred matters. There are none. Inquiries, we've dealt with one. I see no others. And emergent motions. I see no emergent motions, so let's move then to bylaws. Colleagues, we'll deal with the bylaws that are in the added agenda. A reminder that we have Bill 319 and 320 as added. We also have Bill 321, 322, and 323. I've had a request to call 318 separately. We'll deal with 321 separately to accommodate a conflict, and then we'll deal with 322 and 323 separately, but together, if that's right with everyone, because there was a conflict declared on that as well. Speakers, Councillor Helmer.
Two things. If you could also pull 320 separately, and then I have to declare an interest on 322 and 323. These are agreements with SEIU, and SEIU is a client of my company, so I'll be voting on those.
We also have
I think.
324 and 325. Are we dealing with 325 separately then? Okay, so we'll deal with 325 separately as well. Okay, so let's deal with the, yep, Councillor Hopkins.
Are we dealing with 324 separately as well?
They're both related.
Yep.
Okay, so let's deal with, we'll deal with them together but separate, if you know what I mean, from the remainder of the motions. So right now I have 318, 321, 322, and 323 that will be dealt with together, and 324 and 325 that will be dealt with together. Other speakers? Okay, so let's deal with the balance first. So these are all bylaws with the exception of 318, 321, 322, 323, 324, and 325.
And 320.
And 320. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Second reading. Any speakers? There are no speakers for second reading. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. There are no speakers, so I'll call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
And third reading. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, colleagues, we'll deal with first reading of Bill 318. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
Second reading, any speakers? Bill 318. There are no speakers. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
And third reading, Bill 318. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
First reading, Bill 321. 20, Bill 320. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
Second reading, Bill 320. Any speakers? There are no speakers. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Armstrong. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
Third reading for Bill 320. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
Bill 321. First reading. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11 with 1 recuse.
Second reading.
Yeah.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Hubert recused on first reading. This is second reading on Bill 321. I'll start a speakers list. I have Councillor Helmer. You want to speak? No. Okay, second reading, Bill 321, moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. One of us will be recusing. Let's call the question. Two, pardon me. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 10 with 2 recused.
Third reading on Bill 321. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Ridley? Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 2 recused.
Colleagues, I'm going to suggest that we deal with Bill 322 and 323 together. So they'll come up on screen for first reading in a moment. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recused.
Okay, and second reading. Bill 322, 323, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any speakers? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recused.
And third reading, 322 and 323. Almost there. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. Oh, we need a seconder. Councillor Ridley, let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Huber? Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recused.
And colleagues, finally, I'd like to call 324 and 325 together, if that's all right. Related to Baseline Road. First reading, moved by Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 9 to 3.
Colleagues, second reading. Any speakers? Councillor Turner.
Just briefly reiterate my concern with creating constant exemptions to the London Plan.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 9 to 3.
And third reading, colleagues. That's been moved by Councillor Armstrong. It's been seconded by Councillor Ridley. Let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 9 to 3.
Okay, colleagues, we are only about 10 minutes off our target time for this very special recognition. Pardon me. I'm going to pop up to the podium. I'm going to invite Councillor Hopkins to join me. So colleagues, today is a very special day for us. We welcome former Controller Gina Barber to the Chamber. Let's put our hands together for Gina. Yeah.
Welcome back.
A woman who needs no introduction. However, I'm going to do one because I think it's always important to pass on compliments when given the opportunity. Gina Barber is a proud Londoner who paved the way for women in municipal politics. She sat as a member of the Board of Control from 2006 to 2010. She currently sits on the Committee of Adjustments and was previously a member of the committee recommending members to advisory groups and so much more. Councillor Park was very much hoping to be here this evening. She's unable to be here. Councillor Hopkins is, and I'm going to invite Councillor Hopkins to take it from here. I know you've got some words that you want to say, and you also have a message that you'd like to deliver from Councillor Park as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to let my colleagues know this was a joint nomination by myself and Councillor Park to put in an application and nominate Gina Barber for the 2017 Ontario Senior of the Year Award. And I'm so happy that she received it. We received a number of letters from the community supporting the nomination, and unfortunately, Councillor Park is unable to be here. I know she so much wanted to be here, and she has asked me that I read her letter to you. I'm sorry I'm not here today to say these words myself, but thank you, Councillor Hopkins, for saying them for me. One of the greatest things about Gina Barber is her frank and passionate honesty. Whether she is fighting for an outcome on a planning matter, social issue, or for animal welfare, Gina always brings forth a well-articulated argument which always catches my attention. Gina's affection for our communities is always noticeable. You can see it when she is working with volunteers at the Center for Lifelong Learning, hosting a strawberry social, or fighting for environmentally responsible development. She does all of these things because she loves the city. Thank you, Gina, for being a phenomenal Londoner and an out-of-this-world killer bee. Congratulations, Gina. With much love and admiration, Councillor Tanya Park. So if I may, Your Worship, I would like to add a little bit more and speak about this phenomenal Londoner, Gina Barber, that we're recognizing here tonight. We received a number of letters supporting Gina's nomination, and I will try to do my best to summarize it because I think, colleagues, we have to understand what the senior is and means to the city. She has been a candidate in federal, provincial, and municipal elections, a political organizer, campaign manager, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, not sure how many times. She has been a city controller, where she was instrumental in achieving London's designation as an age-friendly city. This age-friendly city document was endorsed by Council and filed with the World Health Organization, and London was certified as an age-friendly city, the first in Canada. It is fitting that she is here this evening because guess what, Council? We endorsed the 2017-2020 age-friendly plan here tonight. And I want to thank staff, too, for the work that they continue to do in support of the work that came before us. It's so important that we acknowledge that work. Gina has also served as a member of the St. Leonard Society Justice Committee, helping young offenders avoid incarceration while remaining accountable to the community. She is still continuing in many ways. She has worked tirelessly for the past number of years and helped lead the Society for Learning and Retirement. As a choir master of the SLR choir, she is very proud of the progress her SLR choir have made over the years. She's also SLR's representative at the Third Age Network in Ontario. She sits, of course, as Your Worship mentioned, on as a member on the Committee of Adjustments and has sat on striking committees. And she has been recently recognized as the 2017 recipient of the NDP's prestigious Agnes MacPhail Award, which I know is very important to her. She is, and I've compilated all these comments from the letters that we've received, a natural leader, a team builder, a volunteer, an activist, a motivator, works hard, cares deeply, speaks frankly, laughs easily, and has a wicked sense of humor for those who know her. She's inspiring, intelligent, generous, full of grace, style, and joy. Tenacious, dedicated blogger, a great cook, hosts great dinner parties and holiday events. She's also an opera buff, a gardener, an animal lover, especially stray cats. She supports young and old and is married to her beloved Ted. Thanks for being here too, Ted. Your Worship Council, this senior has made a difference to this city that she loves. She is a force and makes a difference. To me, she will always be a friend, a mentor, and a killer bee. Thank you, Gina, and congratulations.
Wow, who is this amazing person? I want to meet her because we can use women like that in the city. May I say a few words?
Of course.
How much time do I have?
We're done the meeting. We're done. We usually finish at 11, so take it away.
All right, okay. I thought you were going to say 5 minutes and your time is up. I did jot a few notes. It's so great to be here. And to everybody behind me too. It's great to see this new council. I really want to thank my nominators, Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Park, and the council as a whole for its endorsement. Your recognition is really important. I understand what you do and how hard you work to make this city the best it can be for all its citizens, regardless of age. I also want to thank the provincial government, which apparently gives out this award, because it is really important to recognize seniors, particularly in June when we do these recognitions. All too often when we read about seniors, it's about how much we cost in terms of support and health care. We're seen as a problem to be dealt with rather than a resource to be tapped. So I'd like to spend just a few moments contemplating the benefits of having more seniors around. First of all, so I want to talk about what seniors do. We volunteer a lot. How would the Grand and the Aeolian and the Palace Theaters operate without the volunteers who, do the ushering, the ticket sales, and so forth? Who would look after the kids on PA Day? Who would drive people to medical appointments? Who would greet and assist patients in our hospitals? Who would canvass for the many charitable organizations across this city? Who would prepare and serve the church suppers? We patronize the arts. Look around you at concerts and theatrical productions, at the movies. Who's in the audience? What would happen to summer theater without seniors at matinee performances? We support businesses and we create jobs. Both highly technical and low skilled by our special interests and needs. I can think of, for example, personal services and home renovations, some of which I have some personal experience with as I continue on in these senior years. We pay taxes. We paid for our houses and we continue to live in them as long as we can, even when downsizing would allow us to reduce our property taxes. Sometimes we create jobs to help us stay in those homes just a little bit longer. We give advice, sometimes unsolicited. We let you know when there's no point in doing something. We tried it once and it just doesn't work. So that's what we do. What we don't do, we don't hold parties that violate the noise bylaws. And that was even before you passed the bylaw about allowing amplified music on the patios. We don't commit crimes, at least not that many, that can be detected. We don't send you text messages and demand responses within 10 minutes. We stick to email. We can wait till the end of the day for an answer. So those are the things we don't do, but seniors do contribute a lot to this city. I was really proud to be able to initiate the age-friendly with the help of staff. And I want to acknowledge in particular Kate Graham, who was so helpful in that endeavor. And Lynn, you've taken it over big time. And it's just wonderful to see what has happened with that initiative, which was, you know, on my part, a little bit of luck in terms of timing. Finally, I do want to thank my husband, Ted, for his support. It's not always easy living with someone who's first to stick up her hand when volunteers are needed and who thinks she can fit in one more thing. You'll never notice the difference. Thanks, babe.
Right in the middle. Yeah. Look at this.
You will be someday.
Yeah. And you're going to take
Colleagues, I can't think of a more appropriate way to head into a brief recess that we are headed for a little bit of a break between now and our next meeting near the end of July. And so thank you for all of your incredible hard work over the course of the last many months. Thank you very much to staff and for your incredible hard work, your long days and late nights. It's a well-deserved short break that's coming up, and I hope that you find lots of time to relax and recharge and enjoy. And in some cases, I think for all of us, catch up as well. But let's make sure that we find a good balance before we resume our committee meetings midway through July. With that, I'd look for a motion to adjourn so we can all join past Controller Gina Barber upstairs for dinner. So moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Turner. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Happy summer. I know, I saw your face.